I think we'll get started. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Katie Anshin. I'm the Executive Director of the Arlington Arts Center, and we're so excited to present this program tonight on Zoom webinar. For a little housekeeping things, you are able to ask questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. That's the feature we ask you to use. If you need to make a comment to the panelists themselves, you can use the chat screen to chat with them directly. And if you feel like asking your question live, just let us know, raise your hand, and I can give you permission to talk as we get to that point. But before we get there, let me introduce Blair Murphy, AAC's Curator of Exhibitions, and she's the curator of this exhibition, Take a Number, Artists and Bureaucracy, which is based on conceptual art. And so we're so pleased to have the show on view at the center in Arlington, and we know so many of you are outside our area. So please come visit or check out all the other online assets that we've developed. And Blair?
Thank you so much, Katie, and thanks to everybody for being here. I'm very excited to be here tonight with artist Maura Brewer and investigative journalist Casey Michel. The program tonight takes place, like Katie said, in conjunction with our current exhibition at Arlington Arts Center, Take a Number, Artists and Bureaucracy. And it is on view in person at AAC through December 18th. So if you're in the Northern Virginia or DC area, we really hope you have a chance to come in and check it out in person. It includes Maura's work and also work by 6 other fantastic artists. If you're not familiar with AAC, we are a nonprofit contemporary art space in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, DC. And we have an exhibitions program, an education program, and an artist residency program. We have a few additional programs coming up, so I'm just going to put in a little pitch real quick for those. This Saturday, November 6th at 2 p.m., we have a artist talk in person with Olivia Tripp-Maura, who's one of our resident artists, and that's in conjunction with Body Joy Cage Scar, her solo show, which is also up at AAC through December 18th. That is in person with limited capacity, but we have a few spots left. So go to our website, arlingtonartscenter.org, for more info and to register for that. Then next Wednesday, November 10th, we are doing another virtual talk with the artists Chris Combs and Evan Hume, who are 2 other artists whose work is also included in Take a Number. So we'll be doing another virtual talk with them. And then we have a couple additional artist talks for Take a Number later this month. So information about all of those events is on our website under upcoming events. And you can always find out what we have going on by subscribing to our email list or following us on Instagram or Facebook, whichever your preferred platform is. So for tonight, though, I'm very happy to introduce Maura Brewer and Casey Michel. Maura Brewer makes essay videos about representation, money, and the production of identity in popular culture, one of which we will be watching in just a minute. Her work has been exhibited at MoMA and Art in General in New York and at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, among other venues. And it's received press coverage in the Paris Review, Art Agenda, and The Guardian. She is a recipient of the Lens Award at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Fellowship for Visual Artists from the California Community Foundation, and the City of Los Angeles Individual Artist Fellowship. She lives in Los Angeles, where she works as a private investigator. I was really pleased to be able to include Maura's work and Take a Number, and to have her here tonight to talk to our Casey Michel. He is a New York-based writer and investigative journalist who covers illicit finance, foreign interference, transnational money laundering, and kleptocracy. So it really runs the gamut. His writing has appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Politico Magazine, and The New Republic, among other outlets. His book, American Kleptocracy, How the US Created the World's Greatest Money Laundering Scheme in History, which will be out later this month from St. Martin's Press, examines the transformation of the United States into the world's biggest offshore haven. Casey was kind enough to share a digital proof of the book with me and Maura, and it's riveting and very disturbing, and also very important. So I would definitely recommend checking it out and following his other writing as well. So we're going to start off with a screening of Client Services, which is Maura's video, which is included in Take a Number and was really the inspiration for this program. After that, Maura's going to talk about the work a little bit, sort of give an introduction, and then Casey's going to jump in to provide some context, and then they'll have a conversation between the two of them, but we'll definitely have some time as well for questions from the audience. So really looking forward to getting more in depth. So we are going to start streaming. It will take just a second. And the video is about 20 minutes. So we'll have about 20 minutes of the video, and then we'll come back and start the conversation. Yeah. Maura, do you want to start with a sort of like introduction to the video and the process of making it, and then we'll
see in as well. Absolutely. I just wanted to thank Blair and Casey and Catherine for organizing this. I'm so happy to be here in this conversation. And I also just wanted to, because art videos don't have credits like normal films, which is always a little bit sad. I wanted to shout out Ben and Cal at the Canary Test who collaborated. They initially commissioned this work for their gallery in Los Angeles, and also Ben, who I think is here, is an actor. His voice appeared in the film, so they were very active participants. And also the artist Buck Allison, who was in on everything and is really wonderful. And Michael Webster, who's my longtime collaborator, who composed the music and did the sound design for this work. And also I should probably thank Adam Tate, who shot a bunch of the video for me, who's my boyfriend. So anyways, yeah, I had like a lot of help, and also just like, so thank you to everybody. I don't know, so the video, I suppose it just explains itself, but maybe like the best way to introduce it is just to kind of talk a little bit about what I was thinking about at the time. I had been making, so a lot of my work prior to this, going back several years, I've been very interested in film, and particularly films that, sort of looking at films to understand the relationship between like women and feminism and capitalism. And so my work always had this kind of like Marxist feminist angle that I was interested in. And I started making work about Jessica Manafort, who I'm assuming everyone in Arlington knows who that is, Paul Manafort's daughter. Paul Manafort was Donald Trump's campaign chairman, and then he went to prison, and then he was pardoned, and he had been convicted of financial crimes, including money laundering. And then when I was just kind of like, I just sort of am addicted to the internet. So I read, try to read the entire internet every day. And I came across this article in The Atlantic that talked about his daughters, and said that one of them, Jessica, is this filmmaker, and that he had invested a whole bunch of money into her first film. And so then I because I'm interested in sort of like women and art and capitalism, I was like, oh, well, like, what can I watch this film and then like, is there like an aesthetic, like what's the film used to launder money? And then is there an aesthetic of money laundering that's identifiable in the film? And so anyway, so I did make a couple works about hers, but then some way along the process of doing that, I kind of realized that the whole thing was a sort of displacement, because, I became very interested in her, but actually, like, I'm an artist and I make art, and I think it's becoming a more and more commonly known and accepted fact that, visual art is like a great space for money laundering internationally, but especially in the United States. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm like doing all this work about this other person, but actually I could just launder money as an artist through a gallery. And in some ways, that might like sort of teach me something, that I didn't already know. And it did teach me things I didn't know. One of them being that I don't actually really have enough money to launder money very successfully. It's not that you need that much to do it, but maybe a little more than $4,000 would help. So that's sort of how I came into this work. And then I was interested in thinking about, like, in a sort of meta way, like thinking about like, what, like the act of laundering money itself as a kind of conceptual art piece in and of itself, right? So it becomes this thing that's both about like, what is the relationship between art and money? But then it sort of like, you know, tries to turn that into some kind of performance. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had that I thought Casey would sort of have some insight in, because I think watching the video, some people sort of watch it and think like, oh, is this really money laundering? Like, is it really this simple almost? Like, is what she's doing? I will say, like, before we put the work in the exhibition, we actually did have a couple attorneys watch it, because when you tell people, oh, it's a video where she launders money, the first question everyone asks is like, well, like, can you show that? Like, is she gonna, I had a lawyer friend ask if you would wait until the statute of limitations was up.
What is the statute of limitations? I actually have no idea.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
So but I think that's sort of a question for Casey, maybe, sort of how close to real money laundering is this?
Yeah, Blair, look, I before I answer that, first things first, thank you so much for being here today. This is an excellent event, hopefully the first of many panels and discussions to come, especially about Maura's fantastic work on this topic. We need more conversation around the phenomenon of money laundering in the broader art world, and we need more understanding of exactly that, Blair, just how easy this all is. I mean, this is I've seen Maura's video a few times now, and I think the thing that gets to me every single time is just how easy this actually is. And in many ways, for many people who have far more money than either of us, I think, that are participating in these networks, in these money laundering networks and money laundering schemes, it's in fact a lot easier, because these people don't have to drive 3.5 hours out to Arizona and call up Wyoming. They just have their assistants do it, or they have their lawyers do it, or they have their as we describe them, enablers do it. And again, these are the kind of American middlemen that are helping work. Because I think one of the things, maybe I didn't catch it the first time I was watching it more, but one of the gentlemen you were speaking with, he had this kind of quip about how, he knows you're not a Russian oligarch, and the bank is probably going to know you're not a Russian oligarch as well. And that, I know we don't have enough time to go into all the threads of that, but that is a fair point. Neither of us are oligarchs, and to be fair, we are not advocating for money laundering. This is not a playbook for it. We are actually opposed to it, even though it is that easy. But I don't think it's any surprise whatsoever that we do know Russian oligarchs and a number of other similar figures elsewhere, from Malaysia, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Venezuela, have been doing this exact same thing, transferring and transmitting dirty money, using the art market to then transform that dirty money into perfectly legitimate assets that have the paper trail, that have the asset themselves, and are able to do so in many cases perfectly legally, because of certain loopholes that, again, we're talking about the American context right now, that the American art industry continues to enjoy. Unlike, again, a great point that came through in the video, I think it was Chase Bank, was featured in the video itself. American banks, I'm kind of going a roundabout way of saying this. I think a lot of folks, when they come to the money laundering world, the money laundering space, they have this kind of outdated notion that it's, on the one hand, banks, big American banks, big banks in Europe, et cetera, that are using all this money, and they're doing so in conjunction with these small offshore havens, these tax havens in the Caribbean or in the South Pacific, with the palm trees and the beautiful beaches, and there's not a lot going on, on the British Virgin Islands of the world. That's the kind of image that I think a lot of people still have of money laundering, of offshoring. In certain ways, that's still true. The British Virgin Islands or the Cayman Islands or the Cook Islands are still very much offshore tax havens themselves. But as it pertains to banks, at least in the US, banks are actually far more regulated as it pertains to money laundering than so many other industries are. And that's been the case for 2 decades now. They are really on the front line. So when we have this idea of small offshore tax havens using big banks, it's a little outdated, but not just because of the big banks themselves. It's also because, as I argue in my book, the biggest offshore jurisdiction in the world now is no longer these British Virgin Islands or Cayman Islands. It's the United States of America. And especially because, and I know more, I keep coming back to the video, another thing that was commented on in there was the fact that Wyoming, of all places, kind of pops up. And I know I didn't turn all my cookies off, so I still get the Wyoming Shell Company ads on when I go to YouTube or whatever as well. But it's Wyoming, it's Delaware, it's South Dakota, it's Nevada. It's these small states that, like these small jurisdictions elsewhere, realized they could create this kind of regulatory apparatus that incentivizes anonymity, that incentivizes financial secrecy, and that incentivizes, as we've seen time and again, money laundering. Now, I know we are here to talk about the art world, and I know we have another 20, 25 minutes to do that. I do want to highlight, though, that the art world is not the only industry in the U.S. that has been participating in, or in many ways, incentivizing or transforming itself into this font of money laundering itself. We have real estate, we have private equity and hedge funds, we have luxury goods providers, we have a whole number of other industries as well, in addition to the art and auction world. Now, there are some particular areas in the art world that that we can go into further detail, but at the 10,000 foot level, there's just a lack of regulatory oversight. There's a lack of due diligence. There's a lack of any kind of reason for those who are involved either on the laundering side or those who are involved in the transfer of assets to really ask about where the money came from. There's no reason for them to. So, Blair, to get back to your initial question, yes, it is just that easy. And in many ways, if you have deeper pockets than us, it can be a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I have your endorsement, Casey, that
absolutely. Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I mean, my impression of it was that if I had more money, I could do something where my identity would be a little more opaque. Like I could run the corporations through several jurisdictions, and but that would require some additional resources that I do have, but otherwise, just like on its most basic kind of simple level.
Yeah. Well, Maura, let me ask you a question. You had already been working in this kind of money laundering in the art world space before. Obviously, we talked about the Manafort family, and that's certainly a conversation for a panel in and of itself. This wasn't brand new to you. You made the video. What was the most surprising or striking element for you when you were making it, or maybe when you kind of got finally done with the process, you could look back and you said, well, I don't know. What was the most striking or surprising element for you in this entire process?
That's a good question.
Or was none of it surprising? I mean, was it all exactly as you expected?
It's like weird, right? Because like in some ways, things going in, right? Like you understand that like the world you live in is like opaque in certain ways that produce corruption, yeah. Right? Like I think that for me, the thing that was most interesting when, I learned a lot about money. I think that I've always been a little bit afraid of money. And like, so like, I don't, so I'm pretty like, I structured the video as this kind of, back and forth sort of question and answer with this lovely guy, Geoff, who's a banker at PBS. And I talked to like a whole bunch of people, but like part of it was like, like I ended up using Geoff for most of it because that was sort of the cleanest, like back and forth about the process where I was like, do I do this? And he was like, yeah, you do it like this. And, and so it becomes this kind of, it becomes this kind of question and answer way of like moving through the space in which I'm the kind of person who knows nothing, which is very much how I felt. One thing that I guess I've learned since doing this is that actually, like, I think that woman in Wyoming, I'm sure she thought I was just insane because it's actually like getting a proxy is like really standard. Like it's really easy and standard. Like that poor lady is probably not, she's not doing anything more shady than anybody else is, And so I'm like calling, like asking about anonymity, and she's like, "What are you what are you talking about? This is just like I'm just sitting in an office somewhere."
I was gonna say more on that. I wonder if that was the same. I didn't catch the name of the agency setting it up. If that was the same agency in Wyoming that's been connected to, for instance, the former Ukrainian prime minister, who was a wildly corrupt guy who used a series of shell companies in Cheyenne, Wyoming, to hide and move millions and millions of dollars. I'll have to go back and look to see if that's the same one. But exactly.
how many
Oh,
could
sorry.
be in Cheyenne, right? I don't know, but there could be a ton in Cheyenne, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And they're all in these little small houses that are just little offices because so much of it, again, exists online. So they have hundreds of thousands of companies set up for just those servicing procedures themselves. But one of the comments you just made, Maura, is that, and I think kind of echoes what I said earlier, is that if you had deeper pockets, if you had more time and more resources, you could have made this even more secretive. You could have moved significantly more money through significantly more galleries, more art spaces, et cetera, and done so at a far greater magnitude than even what we saw in that video. I think that is certainly, I don't know, one of the elements I keep coming back to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Blair, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to just hop in. One of the things that's striking to me too, at the end of the video, you talk about both art and money being essentially social agreements. Like there are these constructions, and the fact that what you could do was limited to the amount of money you had kind of reflects that in a way that I think, for a lot of people, money does function as essentially a different thing, right? If you're someone who is working, like, you're mostly functioning in cash, like maybe you have a checking account with some money in it. You're sort of constantly stressed about that and how much is there. Your relationship to money and almost what money even is to you is completely different than what money is to someone who has, millions or billions of dollars. And like the sort of way you think about debt and all of that, just it is essentially a different thing.
Yeah. I also like one thing that I was interested in. There's a piece that I made that goes along with this. That's an audio piece. That's just a bunch of transcribed interviews with people that I did during the course of the project. And so I talked to a whole bunch of people, which was one of my favorite parts about doing the project. And it kind of like weaves together like financiers and dealers with artists, and just like one of the things that I don't know that I've that has really stuck with me from doing the project is just how like incredibly emotional it is for people, especially for artists. Like that there's this like level of abstraction that occurs in the market that has no relationship almost to like your experience of your work in the studio, like maybe no relationship at all. And like that abstraction then like comes around and determines your livelihood, and people feel, I think, really helpless in the face of that. And that I've become, I don't know, I don't think this necessarily comes through in the piece, which really kind of does one narrow thing, but I became very interested in the kind of emotional component of it, both on the side of sort of artists who feel like they kind of don't understand this thing, but they know that it's not good for them. And, and then, and sort of like, what can happen to your career if your prices become artificially inflated and then go down, and the kind of real effects of financial speculation. And then like on the other side of that, like I was talking to you guys about this earlier, like these finance people or like who work with like the super wealthy, for whom like there's also an emotional component, which is that they actually just really like culture, like they like art or they like horses or they like whiskey or they like whatever X, Y, or Z collectible. And so for them it's like this kind of pleasant way, it's like this sort of added bonus or whatever, like they get to launder their money, but also maybe they get to go to a cool party, or like they get to like feel like they have some relationship to this art object that they love a lot, and so I got very interested in the sort of like emotional drivers on either side of that equation.
I was going to say, just to jump in there more, I think that's a perfect way to highlight the fact that, I know we're talking so much about the art world. You just mentioned horses a moment ago. There was this great case of this Venezuelan oligarch who was, pillaging from the local, the national treasury, plowed all of his money into horse farms in South Florida because he loved horses so much. You also have the son of the longest standing dictator in the world out of a small country in Africa called Equatorial Guinea, who was obsessed with Michael Jackson. And he came to the U.S. because there's no regulatory oversight, and he transformed his money via American auction houses into the greatest Michael Jackson memorabilia collection in the entire world. I mean, I think that just highlights these kind of cultural components. Blair, I wanted to get two quick comments of context before we turn it over to audience Q&A. One, I forgot to mention earlier, just for contextual purposes, the U.S. is the biggest art market in the entire world. It's over 40% of the art market. It has been number one for a while. It's still number one. It's considered the largest unregulated market in the world. So if you think about it, the U.S. has the largest slice of the largest unregulated market in the world. And for additional reading, obviously, the book's coming up. Please buy the book. My editor will be so happy. But also, the Senate, actually, the U.S. Senate, looked into it. Published a fantastic investigation just last year, looking specifically at the role of the art market in allowing sanctioned oligarchs elsewhere. So these are, again, oligarchic figures. The U.S. has specifically sanctioned, try to prevent them from any kind of financial system, frozen their money, seized their assets. It looked exactly at how they used shell companies and the American art market to work around those sanctions and launder, again, millions and millions of more, far more than either of us can afford, via American art houses. So again, that's a fantastic piece of reading. Highly recommend if you guys want some more details on that.
Yeah, I think also what Maura was just mentioning about, talking with artists about their feelings about all of this, Casey, kind of gets a little bit to one of the things you address in your book, which is how does all of this affect that none of this happens in a vacuum, right? Like the industries that it happens in then has these impacts on the sort of regular people who are just trying to function, whether it's like steel mills or the art market. So I thought that was an interesting point to highlight too, I guess, for both of you, as far as, how does this impact people who are involved in the sector and
I think that's a great point, because it's also like, another thing that I've just been thinking about a lot is like, and that I was thinking about when I was making this piece was like, there's all this unreality, but then there's all this real stuff also. Like the cow is real, like the cow is real, the art object is real, like I'm real. Artists make things and it takes them time, it's labor, and that is real. And so there's this weird, like, I feel like maybe this is just like I'm kind of, interested, of course, in like sort of thinking about it in maybe a more philosophical way, but like what is the nature of the reality we inhabit? It's like, there's all this real stuff in the world, but you can almost forget about it because the intangible thing, the abstract thing, feels so much bigger and more consequential, than the fact that like a cow exists or like some artist made something in a room.
And I will say, just to that point, Maura, the point you made earlier about how this affects the artists themselves. I mean, I don't write just about the art world. I write about laundering in real estate, laundering in private equity, laundering in luxury goods providers. We're just beginning really to dive into how widespread these elements of money laundering are, not just in the American art market itself, but the global art market. And I am absolutely fascinated to see further writing and further research on not only how it affects the market themselves, but exactly what you just mentioned, the artists themselves that kind of lose this tangibility of not only the value of their labor or the value of their artwork, but the broader kind of contextual elements of the industry itself and what that means for art moving forward in and of itself. So these are, questions that are far beyond my pay grade, but something I'm certainly very keen to keep watching and looking forward moving forward.
We do have some great questions coming in on the chat and in the Q&A, so I don't want to leave people out. Let me see. So we've gotten a few. Let me see. Sort of related to what we were just talking about, actually. One of the first questions, which I think is really strong: what responsibility do art agents, galleries, auction houses have to vet buyers to prevent money laundering? So I think in some ways they're asking about responsibility. So that might almost be, there's sort of the legal responsibility, and then there's the sort of broader moral responsibility. But Casey, if you want to speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. So, in the U.S., banks have been pretty heavily regulated on the money laundering front for about 2 decades, and they still have issues, and there's still all kinds of questions about enforcement and resourcing. But kind of broadly, it's considered a success story. I mean, the American banking sector, at least as it pertains to especially dirty money being cycled through and then coming out to purchase legitimate assets, that seems like it's been a success story, at least relative, certainly to what it was in the 1990s, when it was just a free-for-all. That was one of the best parts of researching my book. You could just drag barrels of cash into a bank and they would accept it perfectly freely. Didn't matter if you were a dictator or not. But as it pertains to things like art and auction houses, but then also real estate, private equity, luxury goods, on the legal side, there's no responsibility whatsoever. There's no requirement for it. You can have those bags of cash, dragged into the studio and then transformed into the asset itself. In this case, the artwork. I much of the lobbying pushback for any kind of other regulatory imposition or new regulations, much of that falls back on this notion of self-regulation. That is to say, lobbyists for the industry, the real estate industry, the shell company industry, as well as some elements of the art world, say that they go to legislators saying that we can self-regulate, we know what's best, we know how to watch out. And what we've seen is that has failed. That has not succeeded at all over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's not particular to the art world. That's for any industry that has been partaking in these broader laundering operations. And it's pretty easy to see. I mean, all the financial incentives are pointing in one clear direction, or at least predominantly in one clear direction. This is we're talking about hundreds of billions and potentially trillions of dollars being cycled through just the U.S. alone, to say nothing of the global markets that we're talking about that are participating in these laundering operations. So, all of which is to say there isn't a legal regulatory regime. There's certainly a moral component. I would like to think everybody's on the lookout for dirty money all the time, but unfortunately, that's not the way the world works.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great segue. One of the other questions we got early on is actually, how are we defining dirty money? So stolen, paid for by committing crimes. Is there a kind of standard definition? And I think maybe sort of, from the perspective of what makes it money laundering, and then, Maura, what you were thinking about in how that definition sort of impacts money, what money laundering is.
Yeah, I mean, what is dirty money? That's a good question. What money is it to dirty? I think, one of the things that I realized at the beginning of doing this project was, I spent like a bunch of months like imagining all of the criminal enterprises I could undertake, to obtain dirty money. And then I realized, actually, someone said this to me, that I was interviewing this finance guy that I ended up really loving in Hong Kong. He talked to me like forever. He's the best guy. And he was like, the problem is going to be that like whatever criminal endeavor that you undertake is going to be so much more interesting than the process of laundering money itself, that it'll completely mess up your project. And so I decided that I would leave that an open question in the video, because I was really interested in the boring thing, not the like flashy, whatever crime I may or may not have allegedly committed. And so it felt important to actually just like leave that to the side completely. Yeah. So I did. I don't know, Casey, do you have like a good official definition for dirty money?
No, Maura, unfortunately, I don't. I just wanted to say, one of the reasons it's so quote unquote boring is because it's so easy. It's so streamlined because they have set up as many, ease of access, processes as possible to take, any burden off your shoulders to, again, cycle all that money. No, there is no hard and fast definition of dirty money. The problem with that, there's a number of problems with that, but much of that stems from the fact that so much of this money is anonymous in and of itself. That is to say, we can't actually track or trace it back to any source. And these are things like shell companies. These are things like trusts that are perfectly anonymous. Again, you can set it up. As we saw in Wyoming, you don't even need to give them your name. Wyoming doesn't need to keep the name, even in the state. Wyoming can keep the records of the names in a foreign country. This is the insanity of laundering in the U.S. these days. No, there's no hard and fast definition of dirty money. So much of it, though, comes back to tracking where did the money come from and what can we say about the source of that money. Is that money connected to an oligarch? Is it connected to a dictator? Is it connected to a narco trafficker, an arms trafficker, a human trafficker? We just don't know, because there are so many elements of secrecy involved in getting that money to the art gallery in the first place and then transforming that money into a legitimate asset in and of itself.
Next question, which Maura, I sort of knew someone would bring this up. Have you received any feedback from galleries, art critics, or others in the art world about their in the question they frame it as allegations about some of the questionable things that go on in art galleries. Have you gotten?
Well, I talked off the record to a lot of people in preparation for this project, and you know, I have to give Canary Test like a lot of credit, because before I started working on this project, I approached a bunch of different, because I wanted to work with a commercial gallery, you know, so I approached a bunch of different commercial galleries in Los Angeles, and like no one wanted to touch this. And then later, I'm not going to name any names, but this is good gossip, you know, later I found out that actually one of the galleries I had approached started coming up, like when people started telling me stuff, you know, like that particular gallery that I had had a meeting with was like a name that started coming up over and over again. So it shows how little I know, you know. I was just like dumbly walking into studio visits like, hey, you want to put me launder money for a conceptual art project, you know? And like, and then people would get this sort of like funny expression would pass across their face. They would like back towards the door. So, you know, but you know, my way of kind of coming into this is actually because, you know, I'm a video artist, so, you know, there's not a huge market for video. So I have like usually not much exhibition record in commercial spaces, like a little bit, but not much, you know. And so my biggest relationship to commercial galleries is working as an art handler, doing like doing manual labor in galleries, basically. And from, you know, my years of doing that in one circumstance or another, there was always this question that people would just like throw around, which is like, how does this place survive? You know, like, what is going on here? You know, like, how are they paying the rent? Because it doesn't seem like a lot of sales are happening, you know. And there were, depending on the gallery that I was working at, there were like a bunch of different speculative answers as to what was happening. But you hear these things all the time about like, oh, it seems like the show is sold out, but it's not really sold out, or people are buying things but there's no name on anything, or, you know, someone buys something and they never even get it, and then they just sort of sell it back and just stays in storage in the gallery the entire time, as a favor, probably, right? And so you sort of, you know, like, you hear, like, when you're a worker, everybody's like gossiping about what's going on, so you hear these stories, but it was always in this sort of secondhand way for me.
I think the technical term for that was shenanigans that we saw in the video, Maura.
Yeah. Another audience question: did you have to go through all the steps? So why not just walk into the gallery and pay for the work of art in cash? I guess what is
right, like why even let them in on what I was doing?
Or I guess they're sort of saying why, you know, what did you get from sort of going through the Shell Corporation and setting it up and being able to give the check with the layering LLC on it instead of just walking in as
I was finishing this book. I don't have it anymore, but I moved it to my studio, I think. But I had this book that's called I worked also with this wonderful guy at Harvard named Eugene Soltis. And he recommended, and he teaches classes on white collar crime, and he's written a book about it. And he recommended that I read, to learn about money laundering, that I read this textbook that they assign called Money Laundering, a Criminal Investigator's Guide. And it's like a really and that was actually like how, you know, how I didn't read the whole thing, I read most of it, but that was kind of how I structured a lot of, like, I wanted to teach people like the proper way, you know, like I really wanted it to be, because I wanted to understand what the proper way would be, you know, and so I tried to be really faithful to the process that was outlined in this particular textbook.
We've also had a couple people ask about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So its role in both art and money laundering, if that's something that came up, I guess, for either of you, or if that's kind of a new frontier, I guess.
Oh my gosh, yeah, this all happened like while I was editing the video. It came out and I was like, oh no, like.
I can certainly say in the broader kind of money laundering, anti-money laundering world, crypto, and certainly Bitcoin and any number of the other leading cryptocurrencies out there, is absolutely at the frontier of where a lot of folks' interest is. I mean, there really hasn't been a lot of research and literature done as it pertains to especially American money laundering in and of itself, to say nothing of global money laundering. So that's certainly kind of the very next frontier for where research, investigations, and findings are going to go. Certainly on the policy side, there's nothing. But in terms of interest, I mean, I think a lot of folks, just as the questioner highlighted, are very, very keen to know more about how Bitcoin and how crypto can be used for exactly these same money laundering processes. I mean, I guess one of the points I wanted to make is, as we increase the regulatory oversight, and the regulations are coming, whether it's this year, next year, the next few years, I mean, you can read the writing on the wall, they will come. Somebody compared it once to compressing a balloon, or maybe pushing on one side of the balloon. You can push on one side of the balloon, and the dirty money's in there. The dirty money's just going to move to the other side. That is to say, it's going to move to where the other elements or the other lack of regulation or lack of oversight is. I don't think there's any reason to think crypto won't be susceptible to that without the kind of regulatory oversight required. I don't know if we've seen that yet, but that would be my kind of supposition moving forward.
Yeah, I think like that. Well, so one of my interests in this project was that, when I, decided that I wanted to be a video artist, like one of the reasons that I wanted to do that when I was like 20, is that I sort of, I had these like politics, and I thought like, oh, if I'm a video artist, I'm not going to be like a painter or a sculptor. I'm not going to make like these luxury commodity objects for rich people. I'm gonna make, experimental videos, and they'll have no market, and that'll be a great life choice. But I felt like it was this kind of position, and then like, you get a little bit older and you realize, no, actually, like the materiality of the object itself doesn't matter at all. In fact, like the less materialized it is, the more available it is for financialization. And like, the medium of digitality, which is like what pixels, ones and zeros, is actually literally the medium of money, because everything is just information. And so I was interested in like exploring that space as a way to kind of like reflect on my own positioning within this. And then the NFT thing happened, and it made so much sense to me, because it's like there were some other people in some other side of the conversation who were looking at the things I was looking at, and they were like, yeah, like digital art is the best space for monetization. And in fact, like we can use Bitcoin to produce this kind of fiction of authentication, right? And so we can make these digital artworks into even better vectors for speculation. Yeah. And that's all that's going on with NFTs. It's also so weird because they're like the ugliest shit. It's like, there's like the ugliest JPEG on the internet, right?
I've finally begun seeing NFT ads in the New York subway. We've crossed that bridge. And
oh my God.
So keep an eye out for those.
Will you take a picture next time you see one?
Well, there's a QR code, so we'll yes, I'll try to.
I want to see that. Yeah.
Another sort of practical question for Maura: what happens to the LLC now that the project is made? Do you
have to file taxes? Yeah. I'm gonna have to pay money to keep it alive. I don't know. Because I haven't done anything yet, and I can't decide what to do with it. Because part of what I had wanted to do with the project initially was to actually go to Wyoming, and I tried, and it was February, and all the roads got closed, and I got like stuck in this weird town, and it was very traumatic for me. So I failed. So I've been kind of keeping this corporation, not totally sure what I'm going to do with it, like sort of wanting to go back. It's a great corporation. It's called Layering LLC, which is
that was a great name.
So I feel really like attached to it, but I think I'm gonna have to pay like $600 or something to keep it alive, and I just haven't figured it out. I don't know. Well, TBD.
I was going to say, I believe Wyoming requires annual, you have the registration fee to set it up and then annual fees as well. And this is why you have these smaller states, Wyoming, South Dakota, Delaware, Nevada as well, that have increasingly relied on the shell company and for the South Dakota case, trust industries, because you have these fees that are involved in setting it up and maintaining it, and the state is getting a cut. Right? This is revenue generation for them. They can go ahead and lower taxes elsewhere, lower revenue generation elsewhere, but they're increasingly reliant on, in this case, the shell company industry, because you are one of thousands and thousands and thousands I think I don't know. I mean, it's not millions, but hundreds of thousands in Wyoming alone that are producing revenue for the state year in, year out. So that's where your money's going.
We have a couple more questions. I'm gonna get these in real quick. Somebody has asked if theoretically, if the source of the money in the video was technically clean money, would the process still be money laundering?
No.
Easy
Yeah,
answer.
laundry is just the transformation of dirty money into clean. That's all
Yeah,
that it is.
it's gotta be dirty. I mean, it would be a good explanation of the process of money laundering, but it wouldn't be.
And then Maura, when you were making the video, how did you find the people, bankers, etc. you spoke with? Did any of them shy away from the subject?
Yeah, you know what? Because I took people off the record. People really wanted to talk to me. I just like at one point. Oh, this is a little bit sad because I only ever got 2 voicemails. But at one point, I set up like a tip line so that people could call me, and I got these 2 wonderful voicemails from people I don't know who they were talking about money and art. But I knew I ended up talking to a lot of different people. Once I wasn't asking for a gallery to like host the show, it was a much easier conversation to have. And people wanted to talk. I love people. I love talking to people. And so I like to think I'm kind of good at it. Yeah, people talked and talked and talked to me. I had hours long conversations with lots of different people from all over the world.
And Maura, were all of those conversations in your car in Arizona?
No. I did record them, but I told them the reason I did that is because, you know, in California it's illegal to record anyone without telling them. So the closest state is Arizona, where you can record. But no, for those ones, I told everyone because I just, you know, I'm not a cop. You know, like I'm not interested in exposing anybody or doing anything of that nature. So I recorded them, but then I promised them anonymity, and I have kept to that. When I had actors read their interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got one last audience question for Maura. How has the process and result of this project changed you, your art, and your own outlook on your practice? Which you sort of talked about a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I started working for a private investigator as part of this work, and I'm just doing that full time. And so I've gotten a lot better at reading SEC filings and understanding corporate architectures. So that's been really amazing. Yeah, so, and then how else has it changed it? I don't know. For me, you know, I think my work, I think for me, the thing that I feel very proud about with this piece, and is something that I'm interested in moving forward, is that, you know, instead of just like a lot of my work kind of will critically deconstruct something, and in this one I am actually doing something, and I'm interested in doing things. I'm interested in enactment strategies, and so I think that the sort of performative element of this piece has been really important to me in my practice going forward. I don't know if that's like a very arty answer.
That's good. I guess one last chance for either of you. Are there final thoughts on art and money laundering and how the two intersect, and the, I guess, practical and conceptual reasons they work so well?
I'll go first because I want to give more of the last word. Just a couple other little elements of context where we are, where things are going. This year, Congress has mandated the first federal study on financial malfeasance in the art market. So that's certainly one of the things I'm looking forward to reading at some point down the line. And then just a few weeks ago, we didn't talk about the Pandora Papers at all, but you know, the Pandora Papers is similar to the Panama Papers a few years ago. Massive leak, offshore documents showing all kind of number, you know, all significant other elements of the offshoring and international money laundering world. But one of those elements was also how art fits within that. There's a story that came out a few weeks ago looking at the leading family in Sri Lanka, which had secretly controlled dozens and dozens of high value pieces of artwork, hidden them, used it as what appeared to be an offshoring scheme in and of itself. But there was a bill that was introduced in the U.S. Just a few weeks ago as a result of the Pandora Papers called the Enablers Act. It has a very long name. That acronym is Enablers. I can never remember what the name is. But it's specifically targeting those, as we say, enablers, those American nationals that are aiding these laundering networks. And part of that would require new due diligence requirements, anti-money laundering requirements on art gallery owners. So those who are actually overseeing, again, these purchases, and those are processing these funds. So all of which is to say, keep an eye out in this space. There's more interest in and momentum on this space, certainly from the federal government, than there's frankly ever been before, at least that I'm aware of. So we are going to be talking about this for a few years to come. And only then will we begin to be able to look back at just how much laundering money in and of itself transformed the art market in the US as well as globally, and what that's meant for the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I have to add to that is like, I wanted to thank you, Casey, for doing this work in the space of journalism, which I think is like, so important. And I think it's lovely to be able to have kind of adjacent conversations, but I'm also just so great. Like, I feel like I'm so interested in the philosophical dimensions of this, but there's actually like a real, very painful, like social reality underneath all of these ideas. And I'm so grateful that there are people who are bringing these issues to light in ways that might actually produce legislation or like actual tangible action in the world. I just think that's so important.
Thanks, Maura. That's the hope. We've got to get there first.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here and for talking with us. And Maura, thanks for showing your work. We will, like I was saying, keep an eye out for Casey's book later this month, and keep an eye out for more work from Maura on this and many other related things, or different things. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and hope everyone has a good night.